Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. This is Paul Cochran. I'm an account executive with Konsultek. Konsultek is a security advisory firm that provides our customers with services to help them tighten their cybersecurity practices, to help them detect, protect, and remediate cybersecurity issues as they arise. And our partnership with RedSeal is crucial because RedSeal has proven itself to be an extremely important security tool in order for our customers to detect those cybersecurity threats in real time and to determine where that threat is existing within their network. This morning, Kes Jesuit from RedSeal, who's a senior cybersecurity engineer with RedSeal, is going to be presenting their technology. But a couple of questions that he'll be addressing this morning include, do you have a good understanding of your network connectivity, the servers, and how traffic flows? And do you have an easy way to quickly assess how well prepared you are for a cyber event? So Kes is going to describe those things and explain how they do that with their technology. If you have any questions during this presentation, please just raise your hand or ask the question in the chat box on the lower right-hand part of your screen, and we'll answer those questions as we go along or at the end of the presentation. If you'd like, Kes can also go into an actual demonstration of the product so you can actually visualize the technology and how it works in a network. So if you'd like to see that at the end of the presentation, Kes is prepared to do that for you as well. But first, thank you all for joining us this morning. And I hope you get a lot of information from this Tech Tuesday. Take care. Off to you, Kes.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Kes Jesuit. I'm a senior cybersecurity engineer with RedSeal. And what I wanted to talk to you today is about accelerating incident investigation in the cloud. From a IT perspective, is obviously we've seen many more customers starting to migrate their infrastructures to a cloud environment. And then they start to have the issue of, how do I deal with incidents as I determine them that may be occurring within the cloud environment or in the existing terrestrial environment within your environment. So just a couple of housekeeping items is number one, we'll take about 20 to 30 minutes to go through the presentation material. If you would ask your questions through either the chat section or the questions section of the GoToMeeting panel, those will be seen by the moderators and they can alert me. We'll answer the questions at the end. And number one, thank you for joining us today to hear a little bit about our solution. So from an agenda perspective, right, is the first thing I'm going to cover is just overall a basic introduction to RedSeal, who we are, that type of thing. And then talk about modeling that hybrid data center. It's so important in today's world as we're getting more complex environments. We've got our existing terrestrial physical networks that have deployed. We're now adding those cloud networks to our infrastructures. Why is modeling so important? But then, once we start to talk about incident investigation and incident response as a process, right, is number one, how do I discover and locate that particular compromised host within the environment, right? That typically is a fairly long exercise for most environments. But then, I want to see what is the potential impact or blast radius of that compromised host, right? That starts to give me some indication of how I need to go ahead and deal with that particular indicator of compromise. And I have to develop those containment solutions. And how fast can I develop those containment solutions, whatever they may be? And then we'll summarize and have our questions and answers at the end. So let's first give you a slight introduction to RedSeal. RedSeal is a platform. We consider ourselves a network modeling and risk scoring platform. And how do we go about doing that? RedSeal ingests two types of information. Number one is all the information, configuration information for your network devices, whether those are routers or firewalls, switches, load balancers, but also cloud configurations, right? This is how we can start to understand how is that infrastructure put together. Now, in and of itself, having information about the network is not sufficient. It's really the hosts on the network which are more important. And so the second source of information that RedSeal ingests is that host and vulnerability data. And then what comes out as a byproduct is a model of your as-built network, right? So a model is not just a picture. A model actually allows you to ask questions of that picture to extract data points about your overall network environment and the host that exists within that environment. So, can people get to host A, host B, that type of thing. So that's the base platform that we operate from, right? And so this is just a different representation of those data sources, right? So whether it's the cloud configurations, your existing physical network information, as well as that host data that we go ahead and model to develop, the model for your environment. And then we provide that information via a number of different interfaces to different user communities within your environment. So if we're looking at delivering the right information to the right people at the right time. So from an executive perspective, right, is they're interested in metrics, dashboards, that type of thing. Your risk and compliance groups are taking a look at the overall risk, and they may be, this may be risk from a compliance perspective, but typically using products like Archer is what we see within our customer base. You have vulnerability management teams, right, that are running the Tenable, the Rapid7, the Qualys type solutions within the environment, right, is how can RedSeal enhance some of that information to them. And then you've got your incident investigation section, right, is these are the people who are interfacing with the SEM, right, doing lots of work with understanding all the different events that are coming in and understanding what do we react to. And then obviously you've got two other groups, right, is you've got your network operations group, right, who is responsible for running that infrastructure and maintaining the infrastructure. And then the network security guys, right, and those two particular groups, right, the network operations, network security groups don't necessarily agree, right? Network operations is all about providing access. Network security is about securing that access. So some of those are diametrically opposed. And what they need to do is work from a common model of understanding of how is that IT environment put together, right? And so what's the goal of the organization, right? The goal is to try to achieve digital resilience within the environment. What does digital resilience mean, right? It's really the understanding of how well I'm prepared in the case of a cyber event, right? And there are a number of steps an organization goes through in building that digital resilience. And the first step is obviously understanding the network, right, with an as-built model. Second step would be measuring and setting benchmarks and targets for the environment, right? So now that I have an understanding of how things are put together within the environment, how do I measure it? And then how do I establish my standards and manage and verify that I'm in compliance with whatever those standards are, whether it's configuration of network devices, segmentation strategies, actual true compliance policies that I've deployed within the environment. And then the last step towards that digital resilience is how do I accelerate my response to the various events within the environment? So whether it's actual vulnerabilities that I need to remediate on a proactive basis, incidents that are detected by my SEM, or network interruptions, right? Is how do I go about maintaining my infrastructure as companies are basically at, 24/7 service within their environments. So let's talk a little bit about modeling the hybrid data center. And we talk about the hybrid data center, right, is we're all familiar with the existing physical infrastructures, right, purchases from Cisco, Juniper, as well as many other different sources, but now I've got these new things, right? And so what we see is a shifting terrain as far as the ecosystem, right, is we're starting to see software-defined everything, right? So we've got Amazon, which is a public cloud implementation, and Microsoft has also joined them, as well as Google and others, right? Is they're starting to define from software perspective of I can't think of this as my traditional router firewall type environment, right? So I'm defining. So it's a digital transformation of that. And companies are migrating their data centers, right? Is shutting down the physical servers that they have in place and migrating those out to things. The other thing we're starting to see, obviously, is the Internet of Things, right? So we've heard about the internet-connected refrigerator, but if we think within the context of an enterprise environment, there are all kinds of sensors that are going on, right? So you've got digital cameras for monitoring security. If you're a retail shop, you've got all kinds of information, and these are things that exist that have IP addresses, but I can't necessarily manage them the same way I do a traditional server. And then you've got this whole shadow IT thing, right? Is IT has never been able to keep up with demand, and so user groups have gone about and implemented what they need. And you couple that with the shortage of skill when it comes from a cybersecurity, and what you've got is you've developed a really complex ecosystem within your environment, right? So you've got your existing physical environment represented there in the top left, and you've got a number of tools that you've acquired over the years down in the bottom left. And now you've added in this new thing, right? So this cloud environment, and it may be on-prem or off-prem. And you've got different groups who need information. So what are some of the challenges and some of the gaps that you have, right? Is you've got incomplete information, right? Is you've got all your different independent device management systems that work with certain parts of your infrastructure, and you've got 10 different security technologies that you may be dealing with, right? So you've got configuration management systems, you've got vulnerability management systems, you've got threat management systems, your SIEMs, that type of thing. And then typically what we see is an evolution, right? Is that physical network is managed by one group, and then this cloud SDN thing starts. And this is where you have typically the application groups who are managing that part of the infrastructure, right? And it's two different groups is another silo. And what this does is it complicates for people too many interfaces, right? Is I have to go too many places to manage my overall infrastructure within the environment, right? So whether I'm talking to the cloud, I may be using cloud management tools going directly to the cloud, or going to one of my other tools, right? Just to get a complete picture of that security environment. So by modeling your hybrid data center, right, is you're getting an understanding of what's going on, right? Is first you're going to go ahead and map out your physical infrastructure. And that may consist of your campus, core, your DMZ, your borders, and then you're going to identify, hey, where's the internet access, right? Is how can people get into my environment? But then you need an understanding of where are your data servers, where are your critical systems within the environment, right? Is how do people get to these particular things? And then identifying, hey, I've got remote offices. How do I connect to those, whether they're through VRFs or through branch office implementations via MPLS, right? Is I've got now a picture, if you will, of how things are connected. And then I may add in my wireless as well as, my lab environments. But then lastly, you've got these data center things, right? Is you've got these cloud environments, and whether they're private clouds such as VMware NSX or Amazon AWS, right? Is I need to have a model of that environment. So let's see how we leverage that in discovering and locating that compromised host. And so what I want to do is take you to the picture, right, of a typical incident response process, right, which consists of 5 phases, right? Is there's detection of the incident, there's analysis around the incident when it occurs, developing containment options, how do I eradicate that, and then what do I do when it's done, right? And then the process starts all over. But it all starts with is there's a threat. What do I do, right? And this is where the top 4 questions that people need to answer. What are the details of the threat source? I need information about the potential indicator of compromise, and I need information about where is it located within the infrastructure. Is it in the physical infrastructure? Is it in the virtual infrastructure? Then I need to understand, how can it impact other assets that I have within my environment, and how do people get to it, right? So it's a holistic understanding of where this particular indicator of compromise may be within the environment. And really, RedSeal is one of those tools that can help you answer many of these questions within minutes of the incident being detected. So first thing is, right, is there a possible incident in your environment? And that's where your SIEM comes into play, is your SIEM is going to identify that particular indicator of compromise. And you're going to have, right, is how do I go ahead and investigate and contain that potential indicator of compromise, right? Is I may have an untrusted source that comes into the network that gets to that indicator of compromise and then can branch off to a number of different locations within the environment, whether they're going to my cloud environment or into my physical infrastructure. So this is where, with the RedSeal tool, is we can run what's called a query and say, hey, how can people even start this particular process, right? Is I have an indicator of compromise, is how did they get in the first place? So in this case, right, we've done a simple query and said, hey, from the internet, how can people get into the environment and exploit an existing known vulnerability, right? So we're combining information from 2 different sources. We're combining the network modeling information, right, of how do I get access into the environment, but then leveraging that vulnerability information to determine, hey, can somebody exploit that particular threat? So that's the start of that process of trying to understand where is that indicator of compromise within the environment. But next I have to assess is what's my potential risk, right? Is if somebody can get to that point in the network, where else can they go? So this is where I can run a secondary query within the software and what's called an access path query, right? So from that internal subnet, right, where I have my potential indicator of compromise, is where else can somebody go, right? So each one of these blue lines just represent access, right? Is I can get from that internal network to one of those other places. And in fact, I can go to my critical systems, which are in the environment, right? But then, do I have any particular threats? And in this case, instead of running an access query, I'm going to run a threat query, right? So the difference between an access query is simply access exists. A threat query says I can potentially exploit a vulnerability that's been identified on those particular devices. So I run that threat query and I say, hey, which of those vulnerabilities can be exploited? And what you see here, right, are some red arrows and some yellow arrows. So the red arrows are direct attacks are possible. The yellow arrows represent indirect attacks within the environment. So let's explore one of those paths, specifically into the cloud environment. Is now I can leverage a different tool called detailed path, which allows me to run a query from that potentially indicator of compromise into my environment. And I'm going to take a look at into the NSX environment, which is in the top right-hand corner. And the information that I get out is how can somebody get from here to there? And so if we look at the results here, is we see that I have an open access path from that, and my only control point is the NSX distributed firewall. So those are the rules that have been set up within the NSX environment to block access from that point in the network. So if somebody has gotten to that internal part of my network, is I need to have an understanding of how can they traverse and get into my hybrid environment, right? So I know my one control point is that NSX server, right? And so that's really what we're identifying is what are those controlling devices? Is that's where I potentially might be able to block access, or where I have unintended allowed access to allow somebody to exploit that particular path within the environment. And really, you can jump all the way down to highlighting the configuration line in that particular device. So in this case, right, we're jumping to the configuration of the NSX server and saying, hey, what are the access rules which govern access to this particular host? So now I want to start to look at containment options, right? As I know where my controls are within the environment, but I need to do something, right? So flagging an indicator of compromise is great. What do I do? You know, how do I respond to that? And so I need some details about that particular incident. And this is where you can access a different tab within the product, right? Is understanding of where is that indicator of compromise from a layer 3 perspective, but more importantly, also layer 2 connectivity information, right? Being able to display that same reachable topology groups, which is basically that blast radius that we were looking at before. So having that understanding of access starts to give me is how important is this indicator of compromise? And I can start to do things such as bringing up the layer 2 map for the environment, right? So understanding where this host is located, what other hosts are located within that subnet, how it's all connected, which allows me to develop my containment options. And you have multiple different containment options, right? Is number one, by having the layer 2 information, I can simply unplug the device, right? And if we're talking about the compromise being in a virtual environment, in this case, I might want to shut down the workload, right? And I'm going to have that information. I'm going to know where it's connected if it's a physical device. I'm going to know what switch port I either need to turn off, or I'm going to know what data center to walk into and actually pull the cable from. Now, the second thing, right, is I already have an understanding of how can somebody get to that indicator of compromise, is I've identified what are the controls, what are the firewalls in place. And what I may want to do is change a firewall rule and block access to that particular device. Now, if all my information tells me that this is not major, I may just increase the monitoring, turn up some of the controls on my intrusion detection system to get some more information, or I may want to deploy some honeypots, right, to monitor that hacker's activity. But the intent here, right, is that RedSeal, whether it's a physical network or a hybrid network, right, which includes cloud environment, is I have to have an understanding of how things are connected before I can start to develop these containment options. So in summary, right, is not to make this too long, right, I have to be able to model that hybrid data center, right, I've got to bridge the technology gaps between my existing physical infrastructure and an understanding of how that's connected and how it connects to one of these virtual infrastructures that I may have deployed, whether that be a public cloud implementation like Amazon or Microsoft Azure, or a private cloud implementation such as VMware NSX or Cisco ACI. But then how do I accelerate that incident investigation process, right? How do I get information about the threat source, my indicator of compromise, where is it located, how can people get to it? From there, where can it go, right? So what can I reach? What other assets might be potentially at risk if in fact I've got something? And then be able to develop those containment options, you know, whether those are unplugging the device, putting in a control within the environment, or just increasing monitoring. And it really gets down to is in talking to customers, right, and asking them, right, how many indicators of compromise do you typically get? And the answer is they get multiple within a single day. And in fact, they may get anywhere, depending on the size of the organization, they may have 25 to 50. And then you ask the question, right, of you know, of those incidents, how many can you truly investigate? And again, it depends on the size of the staff, but most staffs are small, right? There's very few security individuals out there, is they can effectively investigate 5 to 10 incidents a day. And where are the hangups, right? Is when they start to locate it within the environment, right? So the incident response, the SOC, needs to find out where is it within the network. They got to talk to the network operations group. That may take a couple days for them to get back. Then they've got to talk to the vulnerability guys, right, and bring back that information. So it takes a long time to investigate an incident. And so this is where you need to consider a platform that's going to help you accelerate that and potentially investigate more incidents that are being identified within your environment. So I promise to keep this short. And what I'd like to do is open it up to questions that may have come in.
Hi, this is Kathy. I have been monitoring. I don't see that anybody has posted any questions. If you folks on the line have anything you'd like answered, you can raise your hand, post a question, post in the chat area, or feel free to follow up with us later.
We've also recorded this presentation, so if you'd like us to send that to you, we can, so you can review it later or with your colleagues.
I am not seeing anyone raising their hand or posting any questions, so I think that's about it for today. I would like to thank everyone for spending some time with us. And I would like to encourage you to reach out if you think of anything later or have any questions right now. You can reach out. If you don't know who to contact, feel free to contact me, and I will get you in touch with someone who can help you out better than I can. You should have means to contact me, but my email address is Kathy M, Kathy M, as in Mary, at Konsultek.com. And with that, thank you, and have a great day.
Goodbye, everybody.